As believers, we're accountable to God and to each other. The same is true when we vote. So how do we honor God at the ballot box? That's next as Arkansas Live starts right now. As I've been teaching you all week on the righteous revolution, I want to go over some terms because, some of you have watched one day, not the next, whatever. I want to make sure you get the whole impact because we're facing elections both locally, state, nationally, and it's very important that we vote biblical values. But let me define some terms for you. According to definitions, you need to know what you're voting for. I have copies of both political platforms. I have the the Democratic platform here and the Republican platform here. I've read them both. One is for abortion, for homosexuality, all of the things that, in fact, they even, if you were to take that blue Democratic Party platform cover off, you could easily put the Socialist Party, and this is not a criticism, not trying to offend anybody, but even the Democrats are flashing banners that say Democratic or Socialist Democratic Party. So it's slowly turning to the socialism. The other party, the Republican platform party, is more aligned with biblical values. They're for the unborn. They're against abortion on demand. They're against homosexuality as the law of the land. They still believe in the sanctity of marriage between one man and one woman. And one issue that I haven't brought up at all, which I normally do, is Israel. The Republican platform is very pro-Israel. The Democratic platform is very anti-Israel. So, and in my opinion, now I know 60 million babies killed in the womb is a tragedy, a travesty. Ronald Reagan wrote a book back when he was in office called The Conscience of a Nation, Abortion, the Conscience of a Nation. We've certainly seen the end result of that. The result of aborting 60 million babies has taken its toll on America, but I believe we've gotten a reprieve, and that we're seeing the pendulum swinging back the other way. We're in a righteous revolution, and we've got to keep that momentum going. But Israel is the centerpiece, the thread that puts all this together. The way any nation treats Israel is the way that nation is going to be treated by God. And through the present administration, Israel and America are closer than they've ever been before. But one administration hated Israel, the other administration loves Israel. And I was privileged in July, this past summer. I was there with Pastor John Hagee for our 13th annual National Christians United for Israel convention. Every year for 13 years, we've gone there. We go to Capitol Hill. We see all the Arkansas senators and representatives. And we're blessed in that we have conservative senators and representatives that all love and support Israel. They've been positively involved in all of the legislation to bless the nation of Israel. And we're blessed as a result of it. And I believe the nation's turn in showing its love and affection and help towards Israel has turned our nation. And I was there in July, and we had the privilege of hearing Nikki Haley, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, or she's resigned since then, but she was our guest speaker. We had Vice President Pence, we've had Tom Cotton, we've had different senators and authorities from the government. Then we go to Capitol Hill. We meet with Senator Cotton, Senator Bozeman, and all the representatives that represent Arkansas in Washington. And while we were there, the last day that Jeannie and I were actually getting ready to come home, and Pastor Hagee called me and he said, "Can you stay over another day? We've been invited to the White House." I said, "Certainly." So we went to the White House and we met with Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt, who are two of the people on the committees for Israeli-Palestinian events. They advise the president on all Palestinian-Israeli initiatives. And the reason they wanted us there, CUFI, was because they value CUFI's input into the United States and Israel's relationship. Because CUFI, we started 13 years ago with 400, and now we're 4.3 million members. So we're having a big impact, the largest pro-Israel group in America. And we met with Prime Minister Netanyahu back in May when we were invited to be a part of the moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was a phenomenal event. Got to meet with him in his office, and he was very complimentary to CUFI because he realizes what CUFI has done to impact America and Israel's relationship. And you can join CUFI too. Just go on their website, cufi.org, and sign up to be a member. In saying all of that, when we got to the White House, they asked us each one to, and there were just a few of us board members there, they asked us what that we thought America should do in the Israeli-Palestinian issues. And of course, we'd just been to Gaza on the Golan Heights. We'd seen what was going on firsthand, talked to one of the Israeli Defense Force officers. And then they allowed us one question apiece to ask them. I kind of, as we were leaving, as we were closing, I just kind of threw it out. It was a question, but it was just kind of thrown out, not as a legitimate question, but I asked Jason Greenblatt, who has been the president's attorney for 22 years. Of course, Jared Kushner is his son-in-law. And, of course, you know, President Trump is married to a Jew. He has a Jewish daughter. He has a Jewish son-in-law. And I asked Jason Greenblatt, because he's known him a long time, I said, can you tell me, this is just a personal question, why the president has such an affection and love for the nation of Israel? Probably more so than any other president that we've ever had since 1948. It's not a political thing. And Jason Greenblatt said, yes, I can answer that. He said, that's a good question. Thank you for asking it. He said, the president was raised here in New York with and among and around Jewish people. He loved the Jewish people. He is in business with a lot of Jewish people. He works with Jewish people. He loves the Jewish people. Because of his upbringing, because of the way he was raised, and because of the way he has conducted himself in business and now in world affairs. And that was a real blessing to me because I deduced from that the president's love for Israel is genuinely heartfelt. Well, when you have two leaders of two nations so closely aligned in the Middle East, America and Israel, and according to Genesis 18, when Abraham was told by God, if you can find 10 righteous, we see that God places the love of Israel at a premium. Genesis 12:3 said, if you bless Israel, you get blessed. If you curse Israel, you get cursed. It's not that God is actively cursing America. It's just that when President Obama demonstrated such hatred towards Israel, we suffered as a nation. But now you have a president that loves Israel and demonstrates. You know, since 1995, 20 plus years ago, the Congress passed the resolution to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but not one president ever did anything about it. They all talked about it. They all made it a campaign promise, so to speak, but nobody ever did it. But Donald Trump did. And this is not an endorsement for Donald Trump. Anybody could have done it. We're not, when we go to the polls and vote, we're not voting for the character of a man. We're not voting for a personality. We're voting biblical values And, you know, the president's name could be Mortimer Snerd, if you know who that was. It does make a difference, but it doesn't make a difference. And yet we see America now turn in a positive effect because of our treatment of Israel. And that's basically due to this president and this administration. As long as we keep our relationship with Israel, we're going to keep the blessing of God. I was hearing some prophecy teachers or reading a book the other day about this very thing at the end time. You know, you hear about I know I'm kind of getting off my subject here, but you hear about one world government, and that's coming. You might see that on the outside of an airplane fuselage. One world, you know, and all that's scary because it's going to come to that, and that's going to be the 10 European nations under the Antichrist, the beast system, and the false prophet, and you're going to see all these nations devoured and destroyed. But you don't see America or Israel in that group. Why? Because America and Israel are the only two nations that have stood together against all of the liberalism, socialism, communism, anti-Semitism. They've stood together. And America and Israel are going to stand together forever, according to the Bible. So America's future is bright as long as we stay connected to Israel, because Israel is the apple of God's eye. Now, let's get back to defining these terms again. Socialism. Economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. So socialism is the bridge between capitalism and communism. Marxism, communism is how would I say, emulated by socialism. But capitalism stands in the way of it. So to turn, and the god of this world, Satan, to turn this nation towards socialism and communism and so forth, you have to get rid of capitalism. That's what socialism does. It's never worked. You can't find one country on the planet in history that has ever succeeded and prospered and been blessed under the government of socialism. And yet that's what the Democrat Party is now embracing. This is not my words, my condemnation. This is by their own admission. Even had a socialist candidate running for president in 2016, openly admitting that he was a socialist. And that's where we're leaning towards, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, just like Nineveh. And God has sent us His Word and sent those voices to help wake us up and make us realize this is not the way that God intends for this country to go. So socialism or liberalism believes that government should be active in supporting all social and political change, which means liberalism, socialism, tells you whether you're a boy or a girl, tells you whether you can marry a man or a woman. Socialism and liberalism are bed partners. Liberalism opens to new ideas and ways of behaving that are not traditional or widely accepted. So the reason that the haters are so angry is because they don't want anybody telling them how to live, including God. They certainly don't want the president or you or a preacher telling them how to live. They don't want God telling them how to live. They want to live the way they want to. That's what secular humanism is all about. That's what New Age, that's what the Babylonian system is all about. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I want to live the way I want to live. And when you start talking about the fact that these things, abortion, homosexuality, etc., are not biblical and not valid and are wrong or sin, then, they just go berserk. And they really try to make you feel like you're in the wrong, you're the inferior, you're the person that's deceived. They're right, you're wrong. But that's totally the opposite. And we don't have enough voices out there, and it should be coming from the pulpits of America. We don't have enough voices out there letting people know, hey, biblical values are still what is right. So you go socialism, liberalism. Now, conservatism. What is a conservative? It's a disposition to preserve what is established. It's to uphold the Constitution. It's to build on the foundations and the traditions of the founding fathers. A democracy is a nation that is governed by a majority rule of the people. 51% lording it over the other 49%. But a republic is a nation governed by law, and that law is the Constitution. Now, your vote is your seed. What are you going to do with it? We're going to be held responsible for what we do with it, because your seed is going to produce what you sow, and you're going to be held accountable for it. So if you don't vote, you have no seed, and the opposite seed is going to cancel out what you didn't vote. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, and God is making His appeal through us. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 20. Let's go over there. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and let's look at verse 20. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 20. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God did beseech you by us. We pray you in Christ's stead, be ye reconciled to God. We are ambassadors for Christ. Say that out loud. We are ambassadors for Christ. Again, we are ambassadors for Christ. I have met several ambassadors. Ron Dermer, ambassador from Israel to the U.S. I've met David Friedman, who issued us the invitation to come to the embassy ceremony in Jerusalem in May. David Friedman is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. I know both of these men. Okay. They are ambassadors for their country. Now, David Friedman and Ron Dermer are both Jewish. But one is an ambassador of the United States to Israel. One's an ambassador from Israel to the United States. They represent their respective countries. Even though David Friedman is Jewish, he represents America. Ron Dermer's Jewish, he represents Israel. So they both represent the countries that they serve as ambassadors. Well, you and I are ambassadors in the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. So your vote is your seed. As His ambassadors, we have the privilege of choosing our elected officials. No candidate is perfect, and all have fallen short of the glory of God. Do you realize I'm not endorsing one platform over the other, one person over another? You understand that? I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm not endorsing anybody or any platform. I'm just merely showing you what the platform stands for so you can make your own decision, and your responsibility to make that decision and what you can expect after you make your decision. If you want to vote socialist, liberalism, if you want to vote that way, that's your business. If you want to vote conservative, that's your business. But you're an ambassador for Christ. That's your first business. So while we may not always feel enthusiastic about our choice, a vote is a seed given to the sower, not to be buried or wasted. When we sow our ballot in faith, then our seed will produce a harvest. Just think about all the young men and women that have died, shed their life's blood, especially since the foundation of this country, so we would have the right to vote. And when you throw that away, when you don't vote for whatever reason, then you just trample on the graves and spit on the face of those that died for this country so you would have the right to vote. Sow a seed with your vote. Then water it with prayer and asking God to cause your chosen candidate to govern wisely. That's 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 2. You know, I've been to Washington several times. I go every year. And I have noticed, I have observed, not only nationally but locally, statewide, I have noticed that sometimes when men and women get in positions of power and authority, they just, everything they stood for, they forget about. And it's hard to get them out of office. I like what Nikki Haley said. She said, I've served my position, 2 years, whatever. She was former governor, and then she served as a UN ambassador. And she said, I've served my time. It's time for me to step down and let somebody else do it. That's the proper attitude. Number 2, your vote is salt and light. Your vote is your seed. And number 2, your vote is salt and light. Matthew 5, 13 through 16. Let's go over there and read that. Matthew 5, 13, 16. Matthew chapter 5. And these are the words of Jesus. This is what Jesus himself said. Okay. Matthew 5, verse 13. You're the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted, if thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and be trodden under the foot of men? I've heard chemically that salt in its purest form never loses its savor, never loses its saltiness. But if you combine it or mix it with other chemicals, it loses its saltiness. And that's what's happened in America and even in the church. The church has lost its salt. You heard that old expression, that colloquialism, man's not worth his salt. He's ceased to be a salty figure. When I was in the Navy, the old colloquialism about sailors, I spent 2 years at sea on 2 different ships, and I understand this now. They said, well, he's a salt. He's an old salt. Talking about an old sailor. He's an old salt. He's salty. Well, you can't sail the ocean for 2 years and not get salty. You do know the ocean is salt water. And you can't sail on the ocean without getting salt from the water. One time we ran out of fresh water. Our VAP pumps wouldn't produce enough enough fresh water, so we had to take showers with salt water. You don't want to do that. You might as well not bathe at all as to take a salt water shower. Moving right along. You are the light of the world. A city that's set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light to all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So, your vote is salt and light. It shines. It preserves. An election is an opportunity to fulfill Christ's command to engage our culture as salt and light. When we don't get involved or we don't vote, I'm going to keep saying that, we open the door for ruin, for corruption to run rampant in our nation. I used to ask my grandfather how he lived. He was born in 1889. They didn't have electricity, and I asked him, I said, how did you live? Tell me about it. I want to hear about it. I want to know how you lived. And he talked about their water wells, the cooling wells, how they salted down their meat. They killed their hogs after the first frost. They made lard. They milked a cow and churned and made butter. I have a picture of my grandmother with a baby in one arm and a butter churn in the other. And then my grandfather said, hog killing time is where everybody was excited about. It's where we got our lards, where we made our soap. And he said, and we salt the meat and hang it up to dry. The salt preserved the meat. Otherwise, it would rot. So, the presence of godly people in government maintains godly values in our society. If we don't show up at the polls, our values will no longer be represented. If you don't want a lottery, if you don't want casinos, if you don't want marijuana, then you need to go to the poll and vote. If you don't care, then stay home, because that's what's happened. The Christians did not vote, and lotteries were voted in. The Christians did not vote, and medical marijuana was voted in, but we've already had fraud and crime issues already and started, and they hadn't even formally opened the medical marijuana distribution centers. If you don't want casinos, then stay home, because those that want casinos are going to go vote for it. If you don't want homosexual marriage, and you don't want marriage defined as anybody marrying anybody, if you want to lose the traditional, then stay home, because those that want, and homosexuality only represents 1% or 2% of the whole population of America. So they don't have a strong voting bloc, but they go to the polls. Christians don't. I heard a politician, I think he was a senator one time, said this in Washington. He said this years ago. He said, we don't really, now listen to this. This is an indictment upon us. He said, we really don't pay much attention to the noise that Christians make, because we know they won't do anything about it. But he said, we know the homosexual and the gambler and the drug addict and the alcoholic, we know that they'll do something about it. So we pay attention to them. Hey, these people in Washington that are making a career out of this and that are getting rich, and they want to manipulate and control, and they want to, move their agenda. They're going to listen to the people that say, we're going to vote you out of office. And they're going to do whatever they have to stay up there. So you need to make your voice heard. Your voice is salt and light. And your vote is empowered by faith. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith it is impossible to please God. Our vote, now listen to this, again, I repeat myself, is not putting full faith in people. People will fail you. But we're putting our faith in God's ability to supernaturally move upon this nation. And He has. He is. Why would we want to stop now? Why wouldn't we want to keep this righteous revolution going? Well, we're going to continue this tomorrow. Be sure and join me for tomorrow's Arkansas Live. Remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas, and where you're watching too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at vtntv.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on Twitter at Happy_Caldwell.